This videotape recorder will record both picture. From the station, the program goes to a transmitter.
Aloha and welcome. Everyone knows that Vietnam is a country in Asia. But where do the Vietnamese come from? From which branch of the human racial tree are they descended? And what were the totemic symbols of the ancient Vietnamese tribes? These issues and more are some that we will examine here in Streaming from Saigon. The only broadcast program in digital streaming media on the World Wide Web dedicated to an examination of historical scholarship from Vietnam in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. And we start now. In a fascinating article published in the 1960s by Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục called The Origins of the Vietnamese People, Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục looks at the earliest evidence that we have for the inhabitants of the Indo-Chinese Peninsula in general, and in Vietnam in particular. He notes that the Ho Han Shu, a book from ancient China, says that there were people residing in the Red River Delta called the Olak people, and this is what that book recorded. It says, the whole territory of the Olak people is covered with dense forests, ponds, and lakes. There are a lot of wild animals, like elephants, rhinoceros, and tigers. The natives earn their living by hunting and fishing. They eat the meat of boa constrictors, snakes, and wild animals, which they kill with crossbows propelling bone-headed arrows. In addition to the meat and fish which they are able to secure, they eat some cereals planted by burning down forest first and later sowing seeds, or what we refer to as slash and burn agriculture. Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục in this article goes on to note that the archaeological discoveries of the French Institute of Historical Research of the Far East, or by its name in French,
L'École Française d'Extrême-Orient.
L'École Française d'Extrême-Orient, some of their archaeological discoveries, such as the famous bronze drums, contain imagery which clearly depicts the same information that we find in the Ho Han Shu of the Chinese. What is more, Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục explains that this imagery also resembles the lifestyle of the primitive tribes of Indochina, the Moi. And he argues in his essay, he asked, why are there many points of comparison between the Lak people, these Olak people, and the Moi now living in the highlands? In my opinion, Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục says, it is because both of them belong to the same race, the Indonesian race. Perhaps the Moi came to the Indo-Chinese peninsula before the Olak people did, but both peoples were Indonesian. When he asked, did the Moi come? He believes that this was they came here several thousand years ago during the Great Neolithic Age. As for where they came from, he believes that both the Moi and the later Olak people came from Europe, perhaps from Northern Europe. They brought a very fine technique of polishing stone. Their polished stone implements, artistically speaking, can be compared to the stone implements discovered in Sweden. Which are the finest and most beautiful. And as he said, the Olak people seemed to come later, but they belonged to the same race and mixed with the Moi tribe who had come before them. There's much more of import in this brief article, written in English, I might note, by Mr. Nguyễn Đăng Thục, but I'm going to have to skip to those details in the interest of time so that we can get to his conclusion. And this is how he concludes. He says, we, the Vietnamese of today, are descendants of the Olak people, who were Indonesians coming from Europe. They reached here through Tibet and Yunnan. The Olak people were not Viet, descendants of Viet Vung Ngo Dien, who migrated from Lake Dong Dinh. That is to say, they were not part of the Yue peoples from China, who some scholars believed had migrated southward into the Red River Delta. He goes on in his conclusion to say, this theory might displease many people because it does not allow them to recognize themselves as precious descendants of the Chinese agricultural emperor Tunnong, or to claim kinship with the Henan people, among them being Mr. Mao Zedong. But, on the other hand, it supports our claim of generic affinity with people now living on our land, the Cham and the Moi, the primitive tribes of the highlands. It also bestows us the honor that our culture is the Dongsan culture, which once shone brightly throughout the whole of Southeast Asia. Besides the above-mentioned benefits, this theory still has an invaluable characteristic. It is based on science and agrees with science. To sum up, archaeologists compel us to give up distant neighbors and seek close relatives in Southeast Asia. Indeed, this is a fascinating article, and there's much more that we could examine and discuss, but alas, once again, we are out of time. You have been watching Streaming from Saigon, the only broadcast program in digital streaming media on the World Wide Web that is dedicated solely to a discussion of historical scholarship from Vietnam in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Aloha, a hui ho, goodbye, until we meet again. Streaming from Saigon.